A reminder you can help support the channel by joining the AMTV Patreon. You can also follow us and keep up to date on Twitter at AdamMartinAMTV, or if you like, you can join us here at AMTV by becoming a staff member via the YouTube membership program. Hi there guys, it's Adam Martyn here, and today we're back with another unscripted video talking more about this recent news about the changes at the BBC. Notably, CBBC, BBC Four, things like that are going to go off the traditional linear TV in the next few years, and why certain channels like CBeebies didn't even get a look in. That's what we're going to discuss today. But if you missed it, I already talked more about the CBBC stuff specifically in another video, so go and check that out. But today I wanted to focus on CBeebies and BBC Four. So let's start with CBeebies, which for anyone who doesn't know, perhaps isn't based in the UK or hasn't heard of it. So CBBC is children's BBC. That mainly caters, I think, to ages 6 and up, 6 to 12 perhaps, something like that. CBeebies is basically for the under 6s. It's for the very early years, you know, for babies, for toddlers, for young kids who are getting, like, their introduction to television, basically. For many of them it is, anyhow. There's a lot of programs on there obviously aimed at that under 6 demographic, whether that's cartoons, different forms of animation, but there's a lot of live action stuff as well, and a lot of stuff primarily to educate and inform, which of course is one of the remits of the BBC, but you could argue is also very important for a child in that sort of very early developing stage. But I imagine if it's still like the days when I was younger, it's stuff, you know, helping kids how to, like, the stuff learning how to read, with early mathematics, also just teaching them how to interact with people, like social stuff, a lot of stuff involved. So in this press release we had where they're saying in the next few years the BBC is going to close down some of its smaller linear channels, it specifically mentioned things like CBBC and BBC Four, but CBeebies was nowhere to be mentioned, and a lot of people are wondering why. Well, the general consensus I think a lot of us have come to is that it's actually quite important that a channel like CBeebies stays on linear TV, the most accessible form for those that need it. By going all digital, and I discussed this with CBBC, that's great in terms of like convenience and stuff like that if you have high-speed internet, but there are a lot of families out there in the UK who still don't have access to high-speed internet, whether that's living in remote areas or whether that's because they can't afford it. Of course, as mentioned, we're going through a cost of living crisis right now. Prices are rising all the time. And for some, internet might not be as important as, you know, food or keeping warm, which is completely understandable. So for a channel dedicated to children under 6, you know, a time where that development is so key, or exposing them to media, CBeebies is a safe, controlled channel that will get the content out that is safe for that demographic, and they're arguably the most useful. The problem, you could argue, with things like YouTube is, or even YouTube Kids, because they have that kids subsidiary, that can be so easily manipulated to get content out there that may appear on the surface to be suitable for young kids, but on, you know, when you dig deeper, it actually isn't. There was that scandal a few years ago, if you remember, the whole, I think it just got called Spider-Man Elsa, you know, you had these really weird videos of adults dressing up in morph suits and costumes, doing really weird and not, you know, not safe for children kind of stuff. So it just kind of proves how easily that can be manipulated. And again, but if you put CBeebies just on the iPlayer, that's great if you've got access to the internet or a high streaming capable internet. But if you don't, then how are you going to access that content? And when you think, I was thinking about this as well, when you get to internet provider, like, you know, I've been shopping around trying to get some good deals before for high-speed internet, and a lot of the providers, Virgin, BT, all those sorts, you know, they say, oh, it'll cost you about, you know, between £25 and £30 a month. And bear in mind, this was a while ago, it's probably gone up. But, you know, if you add that for the year, so say 12 times 30 at the maximum, that's £360 a year. That is pretty much more than double what the current license fee is every year. Now, of course, there's going to be some people who can't even afford a TV license if it's not included, or if they can't pay in monthly installments or anything like that. And again, that's completely fair enough because times are hard at the minute. But what I'm saying is, I think linear TV at the moment in the UK is still arguably more accessible to more of the country than just going digital only. As I said in the last video, until we get to that point where high-speed internet, reliable streaming is consistent throughout all of the UK or becomes affordable throughout all of the UK, then I would say, okay, yeah, linear TV can maybe be phased out on a more grand scale. But at the minute, especially for a channel like CBeebies, no wonder it wasn't mentioned in that report. I think they're keeping it on linear TV. It's arguably the safest and most accessible way to access content for under 6-year-olds, programming that suits them, that benefits them, that helps educate them, and also isn't, you know, not trying to hide behind anything for monetary gain, sort of like, the stuff on YouTube Kids I mentioned earlier. Will CBeebies go digital-led one day? Probably, but I'd like to think maybe that would be one of the last BBC services to be phased out of linear TV entirely, because it's still providing that national service to families who have children who fit the target demographic, and you can just flick on your TV and CBeebies is there, and it has a lot of popular shows. I believe it has, is it Hey Dougie? I think that's CBeebies. That's like one of the most popular under 6 shows at the minute. It's frequently brought up in terms of its success. And of course, CBeebies at one time had Peppa Pig. I don't know if it still does. It's got a lot of those brands that those kids of that age connect with. So providing they continue to produce that content that parents are happy with, that the children are happy with themselves, and I think CBeebies can keep going on linear TV for many years to come. So if CBeebies survived, then how come a channel like BBC Four isn't making the grade? Well, the whole reason for, I guess, this linear TV axing, if you like, is a cost-saving measure. The BBC is consistently being squeezed in terms of its funding. Its primary source of funding, or one of its primary sources of funding, the licence fee, is virtually being abolished after 2027, after the Royal Charter that governs it expires. So they're looking at ways to save money, right? And one of these, shutting down linear channels makes sense in a monetary sense. Even though Tim Davies mentioned low extra cost of running these things, I mentioned that before, low extra cost of running these sorts of channels, which boggles the mind really as to then, if it's low extra cost, why are you axing them? Why are you not focusing on other aspects, cutting high wages for certain stars and other bureaucracy, things like that? Well, BBC Four is a channel that's been around for 20 years as well, just like CBBC. It came around in 2002. And it's not a 24-hour channel, only mainly broadcasts from 7 p.m. until, I think it's like the early hours, like 2, 3 in the morning. Yeah, it only broadcasts in like a few hours of the evening going into the morning, similar to what BBC Three does now that's back on TV. And whereas BBC Three is mainly there to cater to the 18 to 34 demographic, I'd argue BBC Four is more of like an archival channel, but it also does produce a lot of original stuff, more of like a documentary, more of that educational, informational sense. BBC Four is a channel with its primary focus being on that more educational, informal, documentary style, or archive stuff. Of course, they show a lot of old Top of the Pops, show a lot of old programs, things like that. With that focus, I actually think that benefits a streaming, digital-led platform more. Because I'm going to be real with you, I have a few streaming platforms, Netflix, Disney Plus, things like that. But outside of say in Disney's case, outside of some of the original stuff, but especially with Netflix, I only really use it now for documentary content, for informational content, for educational content, if you like. So for someone like me, having BBC Four primarily on the iPlayer isn't really a problem, because if I'm not watching it on the telly, then I'll be on the iPlayer watching it. So a channel like that, I think, actually makes sense to go more digital-led, more so than CBBC. I'd still argue CBBC primarily, at least for the next few years, till we get high-speed internet consistent throughout the UK. I think CBBC should stay linear, along with CBeebies. The children's content as a whole should remain linear. BBC Four, however, something aimed more at adults, some, again, more documentary stuff. I think that has a firm place in a digital-led BBC, especially on the iPlayer. Considering the BBC's high reputation for documentary-style programs, or educational programs anyway, that's been part of their remit since the very beginning, BBC Four as a brand, if you like, I think holds just as valid purpose as BBC's 1, 2, 3 or 4. If you consider BBC One, that's like the flagship channel, that's where your big dramas go. BBC Two's for more like your quirkier stuff, you could argue, some more artsy stuff. The BBC Four does that as well. BBC Three's for the young adults, that 18 to 34 demographic, and BBC Four's for the more documentary, more archival. I think those 4 channels, that's a nice balance, that's a nice dynamic. But out of those 4, if you're going to take one of them off linear TV, BBC Four makes the most sense. If you told me one of them has to go on linear TV, Adam, we've got to save some money somewhere. Come on now. Even at low extra cost, we've got to save some money. What are you putting on the iPlayer? I'd have to pick BBC Four. But I'd argue out of those 3, the children's channels are more important, because to help keep children entertained, to help them learn and grow, all these different things, channels like CBeebies and CBBC are so important, and I think the more accessible, they have to remain the most accessible to all kinds of viewers. I think that's so important. Not saying that BBC Four doesn't, but again, all I'm saying is, if you're going to put one of them off linear, then I think just stick with BBC Four. But hey, it's not changing the fact that CBBC is leaving as well. But let me know your thoughts in the comments on this video. So are you happy that CBeebies presumably is staying on linear TV? Maybe you're someone with a family, you're happy that your young kids still have access to this via the telly. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it, really helps the channel out. Subscribe as well. Again, I know I'm still getting used to these more unscripted videos. I'm used to reading off a script. But if you enjoy this sort of off-the-cuff stuff, let me know in the comments as well. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new, we'd love to have you aboard. I've been Adam Martyn from AMTV, and I'll see you next time. Thanks to our patrons for helping to support the show, and a special thank you to Macra, Lachlan Hatfield, Jem Pringle Kennedy Live, JPK Live, Anna Art, Adam Martin's biggest fan, Brittany Fan 1999, Max Jackson, YouTube Mix, The East End Girl, and Ashley Kurtz, our AMTV staff members.